Welcome everyone to our last Platform Academy for 2022. It's been exciting 1.5 years since I started this series, and I'm very much looking forward to next year already. For today, we have a special session about securing your records in ServiceNow. My name is Lisa Hohenstein. I'm an outbound product manager for the Now platform, focusing on workflow automation mostly. I am coming up on my 4-year anniversary at ServiceNow. I've been working with the Now platform for about 6.5, almost 7 years now. With me are my very lovely colleagues, Jarod and Paige. I will hand it over to you, and please introduce yourselves and then take us into our topic for today.
Thank you for having us, Lisa. I'm Jarod Mundt, Product Success Manager here at ServiceNow. And over the past 8 years, I've been doing a variety of system internals, security integrations, and things like that. And currently I'm focusing on the core platform and mostly data security and privacy products that we offer.
All right, I guess it's me. So I'm Paige Duffey. I'm also a Principal Product Success Manager here at ServiceNow. I've been on the platform for about 12 years and joined ServiceNow 6 months ago. In that time, I have been in numerous roles as a developer, platform owner, etc. Here at ServiceNow, I focus primarily on App Engine and then the development or creation of custom apps.
It sounded like you had numerous roles in your 6 months at ServiceNow.
And thankfully only one.
Awesome. So everybody, please put your questions in the Q&A panel. As always, the session is being recorded. I will edit it and upload to YouTube next week. So if you find your colleagues would benefit from this knowledge, and I'm sure they will, please forward the link. I will put the recording in the community post that you clicked on to get here. So
all right, securing records. What do we need to do quick before we dive in on housekeeping? Safe harbor. Most of the stuff we're going to be talking about during this time has been around in the platform for a decade or so. It's not brand new, but just in case we do mention new technologies, this is, unless it's in production, don't use it for your purchasing. And today, let's look at some of the technologies securing records, specifically with ACLs, but there's a variety of other things that we can use to do that. And it's not just creating the ACLs, it's you have to manage them after they're there, you have to troubleshoot them. You don't want to make any mistakes and cause pain for other parts of the platform. So we'll get through all that in the next hour. So again, the scope of what we're looking at here today, we're going to be looking for access control lists, aka ACLs, aka ACLs, but there's a variety of other technologies that you can use to secure the records on the platform. We're not going to go deep into them, but they all kind of complement with each other to depending on your company's or your industry's unique security needs. One thing that's new in Tokyo that I love calling out is the data filtration plugin. It's a free plugin, and unlike what we're talking about here today, where ACLs add access, the data filtration plugin actually lets you add in some deny rules and build conditions where people don't have access to tables or don't have access to certain records. So definitely more to come on that in the future platform academies. And then all the other things that you see on the screen here. We're not really going to go deep into those, but they all exist as part of a well-balanced security program. So at the end of the show, we'll ask for some feedback about what you want to see next. If there's anything we touch on that you want to see more on, please reach out to Lisa and us. So another important piece of housekeeping. When you're adding ACLs, you're modifying access for people, it can have some licensing impacts. Please just be aware that an accident of adding write access to your entire org is technically adding fulfillers permissions to your entire org. So just be careful with that. The good news is that subscription management is getting better, and we'll help you, I don't know.
Make sure you're aware of that. And we are working on we're making on tools of visibility, but the first thing is just understand that when you are adding access, you are adding access, and ensure that be aware what your entitlements are and that you're not giving access that you're not entitled to.
And
Yes.
the second call out right here is we do have 2 Academy sessions on subscription management, one a general one, and then the one about mapping custom tables with Adam. So if you have questions about that, check those out too.
Absolutely. So I think that's all the housekeeping of the day. And gosh, I'm doing a lot of talking. So let's take a look at some parts of the ACLs, and Paige, let's jump into this.
Cool. I get to talk to you guys about all the wonderful bits and bubbles within the ACLs. So the fun part. So just, one initial point of conversation, if you're modifying ACLs, creating them, deleting them, you do need to elevate to security admin. And we're going to talk about that special role a little bit later in the presentation, but just so you're aware. As you can see on the slide, there are 10 types of ACLs. Those are what you're actually targeting to give access to. Those 10 types exist today in Tokyo. It has not always been 10 types. I think it was back in Jakarta or so, there were only 5. Some of those come from the new UX experience, but we're really focusing today on records. It's important to know the others exist for other things that you may be doing, but we're really going to dive into just that record type. And then next up, we have the operations that you can perform on that type. This list does change a little bit based on the type that you pick, but again, since we're focusing on record, there are 13 options specifically for record, and we're going to dive even deeper directly into the create, read, write, and delete types, operations. It's also known as CRUD. If you ever hear that, that's what they're talking about. I remember in the way back times, I was like, CRUD, that doesn't make sense. There's a W. But W, right? Update, same thing. Some of those other types, they focus around reporting or like list editing. So there are definitely some things that we're going to talk about today that can apply to those other operations. But all the diagrams and stuff that you see today, they're really kind of focused on that create, read, write, and delete.
I mean, CRUD is easier to pronounce than
It does make for a nicer acronym, but I've admitted this before, I'm really bad at acronyms. So to see that acronym and then see it not match up with the words was very confusing for me.
I bet.
So the next part of that ACL anatomy is the name. And in the next slide, we'll look even deeper into this, but this really identifies which resource that ACL is going to apply to. And it's made up of 2 components, the table name and the field name. You have to have a table name, sort of, which you'll see here in a minute. You have to have something in that table name field. You don't necessarily have to have something in the field name field. And that table name field, it can contain an asterisk. Actually, either one of them can, which is why I say you have to have something in there, but it doesn't necessarily have to actually be a table name. So if we move to the next slide, you can see some high-level examples of this. So the first one, we have a star.star or asterisk.asterisk ACL. And what that does is it allows access to all fields for which no other ACLs exist. So if you have no ACL on your table and no parent table with an ACL, then it will keep moving up and move up to eventually to that star.star or star ACL, which is the next one. The star ACL allows access to all records for which no other ACL exists. So the first one is for all fields. The second one is for all records. Next, we have the table ACL. So that's where you can grant access to all records on a table, a specific table. And then the table.star ACL, which grants access to all fields on a table, or the table.field ACL, which grants access to a specific field on a specific table. So as you move down that list, you get more specific. The top is very generalized, access to everything, and the bottom is you have access to this very specific field. And all 3 of those parts of the anatomy of the ACL kind of work together to determine what level of access that you get. And then as we kind of move into the next part, it's how they evaluate.
All right, this is really the meat of how it all comes together.
And I'm very worried I'm going to stumble over this a lot. It's hard to explain.
It'll be
So
fine.
if you have any questions about what I'm saying, please ask them, and I will try my best to stop and pause and dive into that.
Yeah, and some of the stuff we've added, saying the same thing 3 different ways in the next 20 slides or so, just to really highlight, yeah, there's the same 3 or 4 pieces, but it is consistently evaluated depending on how you set it up.
The next couple of images as well, they exist on the docs. They're somewhat a little bit different than what I've put together here. There were some changes made based on additional information we wanted to add, but the basic structure is there in the docs as well if you find these images useful, and they'll be in the PowerPoint as well. But basically the way we start is obviously the user requests access to a record object. And when that happens, the system starts to look for any matching ACL rules. So this is at a very high level, just looking for matches to the ACLs. It's not even necessarily how they evaluate the ACL itself. We're just looking for any ACLs that match. So the very first thing it's going to look for is it's going to look for any ACLs that match at a table level. If it finds any ACLs that match at a table level, then you'll move on to evaluating the ACL permissions, which we'll look at in a second. If there aren't any that are found, it technically moves into looking for any matching field level ACLs. There's a caveat to that though. Out of the box now, we do technically have an ACL that lives at the star level that denies access. And that's the lovely little asterisk for the asterisk at the side. So while this is technically true in the diagram, because we have those existing ACLs and we have the default deny model for our ACLs, if you went to make a field level ACL on a new table and there were no other ACLs that existed for that table, you would not necessarily have read or write access for that role. So definitely don't go, yeah.
Do you know if this default deny is default excluded for admins?
It is not for admins. Admins are the star level ACL on that. So yes, admins are the special we get permission to everything role. So thank you. Yes, that's excluded. So all of that kept in mind, if there are no matches found, technically it moves on to the field level or column level ACLs. Same thing is true if it finds any table level ACLs, it'll evaluate those permissions. If it passes, it will start looking for field and column level ACLs. If it fails at the table level, it will deny access. So it only moves on to that next row if it either passes or there are no matches. And then from there, of course, as you can see in the diagram, it evaluates at, the field level, sorry, the table.field level, the parent table.field level, the asterisk.field level. Those are evaluated in the order that you see on the screen. And once again, if any matches are found, we evaluate the ACL permissions. If no matches are found, then it automatically grants permission. Now, again, we go back to that same caveat. If they don't have table level permission, and because we have that default out of the box table level ACL that only allows admins, they won't be able to see anything. But if they do have table level permission and they don't have individual field level permission, that's okay. It will proceed as long as there are no ACLs that, exist that prevent that access. But again, if you fail either of those checks, you're denied access to the object.
Right.
I think you did a wonderful job to explain that.
It's hard to explain.
I bet.
I agree. I agree. And so so hypothetically, let's look at one where, yes, you got access to the table. And let's say on short description, there are 3 field level ACLs. And so for the first field level ACL, you evaluate and it fails. So then we'll loop back and look at the second field level ACL to see if if it works, if you meet the criteria. And if the second one passes, then we get the thumbs up, and we don't even spend the CPU cycles evaluating that third field level ACL. Is that accurate? Is that a good way of saying that?
Yeah, and you will actually see that in the next diagram too, and we go a little bit more in depth into how the ACLs evaluate. It shows that loop.
Awesome.
And then in 2 slides, you'll be talking about what order those run in. So yeah,
All
if we
right.
move
Like, we
to
should
the
go there.
next one. Yep. And so this is the one that will look different than, like, really look different than what you see out on the docs. And it's because we have added in that loop that Jarod was just talking about. So towards the top, it's kind of the same. The user requests access to the object, that find ACL rules matching object. That's that diagram we just looked at. And then we start to evaluate. And it evaluates in the order that you see. Does the user have any of the required roles? Yes, or there are no required roles. Then it moves on to the condition. Is the condition true? Yes, or there is no condition. It moves on to the script. If you pass all 3 of those, then you get access to the object. If you don't, then it determines whether or not there are any other ACLs to evaluate. And if there are, we start the loop over again. And it's really important on the screen to note that true or yes can also be blank. So if there's nothing that exists there, that evaluates to true. So if you had an ACL for a table and the entire thing was blank, it will evaluate to true, which we'll talk about a little bit more. It's not necessarily a good thing. Don't do that. But it does work that way. So just be aware. And then I think next, if there are no questions on this particular screen.
There is a question in chat to ask about deny ACLs. So I would think this is in this diagram for the does the script return true, or is the condition true? Like, the deny ACL would be if either of those is false, right?
Sorry. Yes. It's always, it's a hard one for me because we're saying at a high level that it's by default deny. If you don't have an ACL that's explicitly granting access, then it's denied. So kind of yes, but you're not going to create an ACL that says ITIL does not have access to this. You're going to create an ACL that says role 1 does have access to this. And by nature of that ACL, ITIL will not have access unless you explicitly grant it.
So maybe a better way to think of this is what Jarod mentioned earlier. If you want to deny certain things, you would use data filtration if you want to deny access to records. Because
Correct.
ACL grants access.
Yep, ACLs are all adding access once you have access from ACL number 2. ACL number 5 cannot take that away from you. So to really deny access to somebody, you would have to go through every ACL and not find a match. And there's a little bit of a nuance there. If you really wanted to make sure that it never evaluated true for anyone or certain situations, there are some special roles we'll talk about in 5 slides or so from now. But yeah, just one of the things to remember is that when we're talking about ACLs, they all add access. So if you have access added, like through the ITIL role, another layer of ACLs will not remove that.
Unless it's on a lower child table and it's masking the parent ACL.
Yeah, masking is fun.
There are some caveats to that, but if you're working all on the same table and the ACLs are all on the same table, then that is correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, let me cause more confusion.
No, that's actually one of my top points that I wanted to make sure that we said today was keep these things simple. Keep them, don't try and get too clever in a script block, and because later on somebody's going to have to read through these, potentially debug it, potentially add to it, and we don't want to have to do a web of debugging. And a quick story. I really like this slide because a few years ago, when I understood the basics of ACLs and I was on implementation projects debugging ACLs, I didn't know how to explain it to other people, but I knew that it kind of worked. It worked consistently. And every time that I was sure that I found a bug in ServiceNow system, right? I'm like, I have this set up properly. There's, I'm not wrong, the platform is wrong type of thing. Another 10 minutes of looking and I discovered I had made a mistake, that the ACL evaluation was doing its job properly. And so I guess that's one of my tips is this has been part of the platform for forever, almost, probably since 2004. So it's pretty stable at this point. And I haven't ever seen a bug in how this stuff processes. But are we ready to move on over into optimizing?
Yes, I think so.
Yep.
Cool. And so while we have the evaluation still up on the screen, before we pivot into optimization, just look at how this flows. And so this is all being done server-side code tons of times, like thousands of times. Picture a list view with 50 records in it, and you're displaying 10 columns in your list view. This is looping, it's evaluating this when you're making the request, it's evaluating it on every single row to determine, can I show this field, can I show the state field for this record to this user right now? And it's evaluating this so many times behind the scenes. So as we go into optimization, there's some very specific ways that you can structure your ACLs to be more efficient, to take advantage of how ServiceNow processes them behind the scenes, how it evaluates them before your query, after your query, to make your users happy and reduce lag. And yeah, so as we have in this first box, the most efficient ACL from a processing perspective is one that has one or more roles, but no condition and no script. And so again, because as you probably are aware, your user session roles are cached. And so when you're asking for the table, it doesn't have to go look and see what roles you personally have. It just looks to see what roles the table requires across all the ACLs. And if it finds a match, great, that's very efficient. Second most efficient is one that has is an ACL. Again, we're talking about a read or write or delete type of ACL. Has one or more roles and or a condition. So I would think of this as roles and a condition. And that's better because there's no script to evaluate for every single record. It's just a condition. Is this record a state equal closed? Okay, then this ACL does not apply to me. And that's, again, very quick. And also the platform has some caching available to it to make that run faster for subsequent queries.
But we also want to keep the condition field simple, right? To not overload it and have giant constructions with ands and ors and parentheses and all kinds of things in your conditions, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. Rule number one of the day is ACLs add access. They do not deny access. Rule number two is keep it simple. That's a great call out, Lisa. All right, third most efficient is going to be, the second two are very similar, has one or more roles or a condition, and we're starting to use the script block, the advanced checkbox on the record, and we're scripting something. It doesn't matter what we're scripting. Even a simple answer equals true is still a script that has to be evaluated every time this record gets looked at. And once we have a script block, you know how powerful the platform is. You can, I even saw some internal docs that were joking around about only allowing access if it would reach out to the Twitter API, and if you had not tweeted 5 times yet per day, it would not allow you access. But so, you know, the sky's the limit of what we can put into this script block. But be aware that that is server-side scripting. It will slow down the execution of these. So great power, great responsibility, and all that. So, and then finally, the most complicated, but and therefore slowest, but also can be the most flexible for you if we have one or more roles, and also a condition, and also a script block. So that's requiring the server-side logic to do evaluation on all 3 levels, and is, no surprise, going to be the slowest compared to these hyper-fast ones over here on the left side. So if we look at how the platform caches this information, if we don't use a condition block, then it applies to every record on the table. It doesn't care about what the state is or who the assignment group is, as an example. So we can just blanket give a yes or no based on the table level based off of a role. So that is super fast. It is cached per session. So next time you go to back to a list view, or when you go to the second page on a list view, that particular ACL is very fast because it doesn't have to do all the processing. When we start adding a condition, then that does get cached per record. So if you load up a list of 20 things, we've already evaluated all those records. Let's say you click into one of those records. When we load up the form view, that record level ACL processing has already taken place. It's already cached in per record per session. So the database can just go right to getting you the information and rendering the form. We don't waste any time processing that ACL.
So if I were to navigate to a record directly by the direct link, it would check the ACLs if I have not opened it in the list form before.
Correct.
In
yes.
that session.
Yes. It will. When we say cached, there's a cache check. It'll say, hey, is this? And I don't know all the nuances of how long the cache lasts, but I do. Doing research for this session, did see that yes, it's the table level is cached per session until a period of time goes by, or maybe I don't want to speculate on all those conditions, but correct. Yeah, if you see a link to a record in an email, you click directly into that record. It will check to see has there been ACLs rendered per cache, and if not, then it will do the processing to evaluate those. And that's why sometimes if you are looking at an email report, or you get an email link and then you click on it, and occasionally it will say, hey, this record does not exist, or this record is removed by security constraints. And so that's, that record exists, but you are not allowed to see it.
I would also add that if you ever see something from a customer where they're like, oh, the first time I click into this list, it's really slow to load, but then the next time I go, it's super fast. I don't know what's going on. It's only the first time. That might be the problem, because once it's been run and it's cached, it's going to run a lot faster. But the next time they log in the next morning or whatever, it's slow again. So it's definitely something to look at if you're seeing like a slow list load initially.
Exactly. And I have a couple tips on that in the debugging section later on. And so you can probably guess what the next block is here. Because we're having to evaluate a script on every record or on every field on a record. The caching system doesn't assume anything. It just says, nope, this is scripted. I'm going to evaluate that every time I look at it. So we're not getting any performance gains once we go into the world of scripting on our ACLs. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we require the flexibility and granularity that script block brings it up, but in the conversation of caching, we just don't get to take advantage of those speed gains. And then one more reason is if you can do some or most or all of your ACLs in a role form with no condition and no script, those also get evaluated before the database even begins query. So if you say, give me all the incidents, it will do a quick ACL check, the role-based ACL check, and says, do you even have permission to look at the incident table? And if you don't meet the requirements of at least one ACL based off of your roles, then it doesn't even bother spending any database cycles retrieving that data for you. It just says, no, thanks, you don't have permissions to that.
It just says no. Computer says no.
And yeah, computers only do what we tell them to do. And in this case, it's gonna save processing on the database side because it knows if you don't have a role, you definitely don't meet the requirements of a role and a condition and a script. And so I'm not even gonna bother with the record level query. So just another pro for if for some or most of your users, you can squeeze them into ACLs that have that no condition and no script. That's another optimization tip for you here. And then everything else, because condition, right? If we're saying you have access to things that are assigned to your particular assignment group, or you have access to things that are work in progress, but not closed and things like that, that will have to be after the database is queried and after the system is looping per record to display it to you. So that is a couple minutes on how you can make things run really fast. All right, what is next? Oh yeah.
Leading practices. All right. So a couple of do's and don'ts. For a few of these, we've got a couple of slides that expand on them. So if this does not initially make sense to you, hopefully cover it a little bit more. But first off, restrict to role first. This is really the optimal way for ACLs to run. So if you can restrict only based on role, that's really the best way to do it. It's going to be the fastest ACL to run. It's going to load your tables and your records faster than any other type of ACL. Avoid or with scripted has roles, which we'll see that here in just a second. Kind of show you what that looks like and why it's bad practice and talk briefly about a better way to do it. If you have two or more ACLs with the same condition and script, but with different roles, combine those into a single ACL and then just add both roles. That way it's only evaluating the ACL once against both roles, but it's only running those conditions and scripts once. Next, we have matching read ACLs for existing write ACLs. Write ACLs can technically grant you read access, but you should really have those read ACLs existing regardless. Because if for some reason you remove the write ACL, well, they're going to lose access to read as well, and that may not actually be the outcome you're looking for. And then lastly, on the do's, use conditions instead of scripts if at all possible. So, if we're looking at that optimization chart, roles first, conditions second, scripts third. So try not to use scripts unless you have to. We know what happens, but also trying to minimize the number of times you have to use scripts. A couple of don'ts. So don't create overly complex ACLs. And I'll even expand on this a little bit. And I would say not only a single ACL, but a group of ACLs for a single table should not be overly complex. So if you have 90 ACLs on a single table, you might want to really look into what's going on there. That complex logic, it's going to have to run through a lot of those ACLs before it grants someone access. And again, that's not optimal. Additionally, above and beyond it not being optimal, it's also kind of a maintenance nightmare. In my past life, we called it ACL spaghetti because it was difficult to maintain and it was difficult to figure out what was going on and debug. And, you know, X person has access to this field, but only when an incident is in this particular state. And this was all on, I mean, it was just a nightmare to maintain. And cleaning it up, while great, when we finally got to clean it up, was also pretty terrible. Next, don't create open ACLs. So like we saw earlier and have talked about earlier, and we'll see again here in a minute, those ACLs that have no roles, no conditions, and no script at all, that's an open ACL. We don't want to do that. And then lastly, don't create all-in-one multi-purpose ACL. So don't try to create a scripted ACL that's, you know, trying to evaluate 6 different, completely different conditions all within the script, and don't do that. Again, it's
I'm guilty of that. Guilty of that in the past, but luckily I've been through this webinar now and would not do that again.
And admittedly, I have done most of these at some point in the last 12 years. So you learn as you go. So if we move to the next
Platform Academy. Where was the Platform Academy 10 years ago?
That is a good question.
If you move to the next screen, we'll look at a little more in depth into one of those. So, you know, the avoid or with has roles. So as you can see in the bottom here, and I have a sneaking suspicion that this is actually an out of the box ACL that's old as dirt. But as you can see on the first row, it is using an or condition with the has roles in addition to evaluating against the current user is the owner of the current record. You really don't want to do that. This should really be 2 separate ACLs, which this is kind of repeated twice because we're making 2 different points, but don't do that. There's no reason to do that. It would evaluate really slowly versus, you know, creating those 2 separate ACLs. If you had the separate ACL for just those roles, that's going to evaluate much faster. And it's going to evaluate before the database is queried, and it's going to be cached. So.
Bingo. Yeah, and we kind of touched on it a little bit before, but yeah, I am definitely guilty of trying to cram everything into a single ACL, you know, just to get the story off my plate and move on. But yeah, in this case, I agree. Break it into multiple ACLs, probably even around personas, right? We could have one that's based off of a requester persona, like with that get user ID is the current SysID, and then kind of a fulfiller or a licensed user, all the others. And that can help you organize them too. And if you don't just think about fields and tables, but who's the personas behind, or who actually needs access to those.
Yep. And there was a question which I think just merits talking about out loud, which is if you have, and Danielle already answered it, but I want to make sure people see this. If you have multiple ACLs for the same thing, same name, if any one of them is true for access, does ServiceNow evaluate all the ACLs, or does it stop once you determines you have access? It stops once it determines you have access. So again, when you're looking at optimization, if you get access at the very first step, it's not even going to evaluate the rest. So again, as we're getting ready to move into debugging, at least in my experience, I have seen where a specific group of users, when they went to go load a list, it was very, very slow. But another group of users that had the ITIL role, it was very, very fast. And that would be because the ITIL role was just granting general access. And so it was evaluating that first ACL and that was it. For the other users, it was evaluating a lot of other ACLs and there was some scripted stuff going on in there. And so it took a lot longer for that list to load. So ultimately it was still the ACLs that were the problem. right, so if you want to move to the next one.
Starting to smell a pattern.
Yeah. There's the pattern that I've messed up a lot in my life, but I've learned a lot of good lessons.
And can share with others.
Share with others. So this is an example of an open ACL. And as it states, no role, no condition, no scripting. That means everyone has access. Everyone would have access to this field on this table, or to the table itself. So again, don't do that unless you really, really mean to do it, which is likely rare that you really, really mean to do it.
And at this point, remember, there's always licensing. So if you give everybody access to a table, this might be a problem with your licenses.
That is also true.
I
And then if we
want
move
to add
to
a
the
note
next
too. I see the open ACLs where I see those most commonly. It's an accident. It's always an accident, but it's where I went to create a table, and I went and I automatically created the ACLs, and rather than remove the ACLs, I just deleted the roles. You need to make sure you go delete the ACL, right? In that process, I've just seen people who didn't quite understand. Did you clear it out or not? And when you test, it all works. So make sure when you're testing on your apps, you test that people don't have access to.
Yeah, you test the reverse. You're not just testing that they have access. You're making sure the people who shouldn't be able to see it can't see it. Yeah, that's a good one.
Great call out.
Can you create an ACL without a role? And if you can, should you? No, and Daniel's got it again. Just to again repeat what he's saying you can, and it just depends on the requirements, and thinking about your end users. So
Did we talk about SNC internal and it once you have?
we will.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good segue. We'll come back to creating ACLs without roles in the special role slide coming up.
There's just one more, and it'll be quick because we've kind of already mentioned it, and then Jarod even got into it further, which is avoid combining, that persona logic, the requester and fulfiller logic. So again, this is the same ACL we saw earlier. It should really be two different. You've got your fulfiller type roles, that are scripted in there, and then, is the current user also the current owner of the record because this is on the user table. So, splitting up that logic is smart. Then we can move on into special cases and debugging.
All right. Yeah, I think we've touched on a couple of these things, so this might not take as long, but if you've been in here editing a form, we noticed that admin override checkbox here. Just says if you have the admin role, I don't care what the rest of this ACL says, I'll just evaluate as true. But that's not 100% accurate. There are just a very few amount of exceptions to things that block the admin override box. So things like if you see the nobody role, the security admin role, or maint roles, if those are listed in the roles, then the admin overrides will not give these admin access to that particular ACL. The other option that's depending on how your scoped app is configured, there's a scoped application administration mode that you can enable on the scope record itself. If that is turned on and you have a admin role for your scope opted in, then that is also part of the exclusion list. And
is that what's happening in HR service delivery? That admins cannot see HR records unless they're also HR admins?
That is exactly what is preventing access.
I learned something.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Security incident response, HR, or even your custom brand new scoped app,
Sure.
all evaluate the same way. Again, it's not 100%. The scope has to be turned on into application administration mode, and there has to be at least one role that has that's flagged as the scoped app admin. But those are special roles that you can see. yeah, and we're familiar with security admin. Nobody is exactly what it means. Nobody will evaluate to that. It's kind of the opposite of public. And then maint is a ServiceNow corporate role that allows support and product management to do things that, and just kind of a special role that prevents admin from getting access to things. And I mentioned the other one, public, and that's a special role that will give access to even unauthenticated people. So if you need to make a UI page, a table, or portal things accessible to even users that are not logged into your system, that is where the public role comes in. And that's a whole another webinar all on its own. So I won't go too deep into that. And then, like Adam brought up, the SNC internal, SNC external roles. There's a thing called the explicit roles plugin that gets enabled on your instance as part of some. I don't think anyone installs it directly, but it's baked into a few other major plugins that you may have installed on your instance. And so when that plugin is installed, it forces every sys user account to have at least one role, and it will also force every ACL to have at least one role. So it helps prevent mistakes like what we saw earlier. If you tried to save that record with no roles, no conditions, and no script, it would slip the SNC internal role into that ACL. So again, that's another thing we could go deeper on, but we'll stay away from that for today. But just if you see these things, that's where they're coming from. And then on to, I promised you some debugging tips in the past. So like optimization, there's a couple things. The top two parts about debugging are, how do I make it work as expected? And hey, this is really slow. What can I, what is making it slow? So first thing, like Paige's example before, it's fast for some people and slow for other people. And, I can prove that, I impersonate this person and it's slow for me as well. So yeah, it's not just their computer or, their network connection. So slow ACLs, we track those things behind the scenes. So as a sysadmin, you'll be able to go into the transaction log or the slow transactions tables, and you'll be able to filter by table, filter by date, filter by users, and things like that. And you'll see how long it took the ACL for that record. How long did it take to process all of the ACLs for this particular record, for this particular transaction? So you'll see that for records, but you'll also see that for like scripted REST APIs and other types of things in that table. And then if you want to see an aggregate and averages across all of your things, that's where the slow transactions comes in. And you'll see the total time, how many milliseconds has all of the queries for today added up to, and then also what's the average processing time. Those are in those tables. And then what about things that are not working as expected? There's a couple, there's kind of the older way and the newer way to debug what things are happening in your instance. So the traditional way was the inline UI enable debug security. It's a left bar option. And then once you enable that, you will start to see something that looks like this at the bottom of every list view and every form view. And
I could never read them. I would try and I would always fail to understand them.
I don't know if I can zoom in here, but we can see just a quick, we're reading, we can see that I'm looking for the ACL for UI page for incident_list for read. And we see that I got green checkbox for the star UI page. And then we move on to, how about this in the incident read? And this is a screenshot, so the hovers won't work, but we can see that there's these last three options are exactly what we were talking about earlier. The second line is, did you meet the role requirement? The second one, did you meet the condition requirement? And the third one is, did you meet the script requirement? And so to answer the question, to reiterate Daniel's answer from earlier is, yeah, we got a yes on this first one. So there's 4 other ACLs that could have applied, but we're not even going to bother checking those because I got my yes on the record level. So then we go into the read for incident.number and same sort of thing. And the blues indicate that this was a cached response. So we see that we got yes, we got access to incident.number through the incident.star ACL. And so on and so on, right? We're still looking for, so that's the traditional way. It will fill up your form view at the bottom and the bottom, your list view with lots of these things. And the newer way is bolted onto the new, the script debugger, script tracer pop-up. So if you enable that, you'll get a similar looking view within your script debugger pop-up, and it gives you the same type of information, but this can be helpful because it mixes this in. If you have multiple types of things that you're logging, everything is in line. And one of the coolest features of this pop-up is notice that the evaluation time goes down to the 1,000th of a second. So everything is in perfect order. You can see, when did my before query business rules run? When did the ACLs run? When did my before business rules, if we're trying to save a record and you have 5 different business rules that have a order of 100, this will let you know exactly which order they processed. And it mixes in all the security information in line. So yeah, so when we're trying to figure out why can I not see what I want to see, or why are users not getting what they're supposed to, these are the debugging tools. We had a couple of other examples queued up, but I think we kind of got off.
We've kind of covered them well,
yeah.
And I think we actually kind of covered those questions anyway, and they'll still be part of the PDF. So
yeah,
we'll share them on the deck and also in the community.
Yeah, we did cover these. If your scripting has a role, it's basically the same thing, but you're not going to be cached. And let's skip through these and get into this part.
Yes. And while questions may come in, I will start the survey for this session, and we would love for you to give us your feedback on how you like this. And we'll open the floor up if there are any more questions around this.
Yeah, thank you to everyone that's submitted questions during the show. It does help us make sure we're touching on the things that you came here to hear.
Yes, absolutely. Let's see if there are more questions coming in, but in the meantime, let me wrap this up a little bit. Thank you so much, Jarod and Paige, for preparing this presentation for us. This was super interesting. I learned a lot, and I've been on the platform for over 6 years. I think this is a very, very valuable session for everyone, whether you're a beginner or an expert. There will be something in here for everyone to learn. So thank you again for coming on my academy for this. I'm very much looking forward to bring this to everyone through YouTube. You've already put up those slides with the link to the academy. This is the last session for 2022. We will pick up again on January 19th. So we'll skip a couple of sessions in the regular bi-weekly cadence. But I look forward to see you again next year. And we have some awesome sessions in our backlog. We want to tackle a couple of Better Together stories in our next Academy sessions. So combining different platform products to bring you even more value if you use them together. So not just looking at one platform product on its own, but how it works together with different other products as well. And we'll also have a new session on Decision Builder early next year because there are some great innovations coming in the next releases. So I'll be looking forward to that as well. I would love for all of you not just to fill out the survey that we have right here, and I've seen a lot of answers have come in, but also to take a few minutes to answer questions about the Academy community articles. So we want to know how you find your way in the new community portal and how well you find the Academy sessions. And did you know there are more Academy sessions than just this one? We do have a mobile academy, a virtual agent academy. We have a next experience academy, one about AI, one about, what did I forget? Process optimization. There's more. So be sure to also check out sn.works/academy to find all of the platform academies that we offer. And that's about all I have to say today. At any rate, I wish everybody lovely holidays. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Jarod and Paige, for this session. This was awesome. And Merry Christmas. I'll see you all next year.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.